Welcome everyone to another popular culture dialogue brought to you by the Popular Culture Studies Journal of the Midwest Popular Culture Association / American Culture Association. I don't know, is that the right slash or is it that slash? I can't remember. But this is our second such dialogue, and we have a lot of great people with a lot of great ideas. And we wanted to make certain we gave them a wonderful space to share those ideas. So today's topic is going to be the impact of this pandemic on popular culture. Specifically this one, because this is the one we're all living through and we've had experiences with and we have observations about now. Of course, it would be interesting to think about popular culture during the 1918 pandemic too, I suppose, but that's kind of what we're here today to talk about, popular culture during the pandemic. So I'm just going to allow our wonderful panelists, discussants, to introduce themselves and what brought them here. So I'm just the editor of the Popular Culture Studies Journal, and I've been living through the pandemic with popular culture, so I have those really basic insights to offer here. But I'm going to start with the person to my left, I guess, sort of. Sarah, introduce yourself.
My name is Sarah LeBlanc, and I'm an assistant professor of communication at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. And I am interested in this topic mainly because it has the pandemic has impacted how we consume our pop culture, as well as how some pop culture is distributed. And it's impacted how a lot of us are seeing the celebrities we follow on social media in different lights.
Good. And especially with all of the political aspects that have been happening as well, there are some interesting intersections there. Great. And I'm going to go down to Michelle then next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Crowley. I am a lecturer at Northern Kentucky University in the Communication and Pop Culture Department. And what attracted me to this is kind of going off of what Sarah said, is the consumption as well as production of popular culture. And a concept that's near and dear to my heart is the fandoms and how fandoms are reacting, especially in the case of shows that have ended during this time. And they're very vocal on social media, and we'll see where this goes.
Wonderful. And Michelle, I might want to send one of my students your way because he did a research paper looking at virtual cons and how if fans have been thinking about participating or have been participating in the virtual compared to the in-person.
Definitely. That'd be great to work with them.
Cool. And we'll go down to Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse Kavadlo. I'm a professor of English and Humanities at Maryville University in St. Louis. I'm interested a lot in context, and my last book, and it grew out of an essay that was in the Pop Culture Studies Journal in the inaugural issue, was specifically about 9/11 and popular culture in terms of the impact on movies, television, superhero narratives, as well as some of the direct, something like adaptations of those storylines. And this pandemic strikes me as in many ways completely different in that, a lot of the 9/11 narrative context really focused on the day that changed everything, or the particular ways in which we're able to sort of study narratives about terror and terrorism. And this one has just about nothing in common with it. It was this thing that changed everything, but that arguably there is no, where were you when? There is no day that this happened. Everything changed and nothing happened. And so we're left in this moment of trying to figure out what does this mean in terms of our metaphors and our narratives.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see the stories that come out of it. Like I know, we had like the most recent Borat movie and how that was impacted so far. And I think there's a movie coming out on HBO Max called Lockdown or something. So yeah, so it'll be interesting, to see the stories that come out of it. Great. And people shifted around now, but we're going to go down to Krysten then.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Krysten Stein. And hi, Michelle. Michelle and I did our master's together like years ago. So it's so great to see a familiar face. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Illinois at Chicago, studying communication and media. And then I also am doing 2 graduate concentrations in Black Studies and Gender and Women's Studies. Okay, so I've been having a lot of thoughts about this, but some of the key things I've been thinking about is how people utilize pop culture as a coping mechanism, especially in times of like crisis, like now, and especially like TV and the habitual watching of television. So that's one thing. And then I've also been thinking a lot about media industries, so such as like movies, so the production of, and then we all would go to the movie theater, be this huge thing. Now some of these newer films are coming out on streaming devices, so how that looks, how that impacts labor. Just like basic representation in pop culture of COVID, like Grey's Anatomy I know did an episode, so that's been really fascinating, like how it's showing up. And then kind of speaking to Jesse's point, I was thinking also about comparison between 9/11 and COVID and how it's going to impact kind of pop culture in the years to come. And then I'm sorry, this is a lot. We probably won't get to all of this. These are all my random thoughts. And then also, can we use pop culture to teach audiences about COVID? Mm-hmm. And is that happening? And is it not? And could it happen? So that's a lot of stuff that I have going on in my brain. But yeah, that's where I'm at with all of it. So I'm happy to have this discussion and kind of, develop these thoughts further.
Wonderful. And the last one about the teaching I find interesting too, because I've been really getting into TikTok and that TikTok community and how many doctors you see in TikTok and nurses who are trying to educate people. Yes. So yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. And Hunter, last but not least.
Hi, my name's Hunter Reedy. I am a master's student at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. I'm going for political science, but kind of like a lot of my studies deal with pop culture and stuff like that. We just don't necessarily have a pop culture major at the university. What's interested me about the pandemic has been how connected people are to pop culture. There's a lot of new stuff out there, but there's also resurgences of nostalgia out there. A lot of us have been stuck inside, so pop culture is really all we have right now. So we can't go out and go to the bars or go to the restaurants or whatever. And so pop culture has arguably been more important this year than it has in previous.
Great. I think that's a great place to start really diving into it then, this idea of all we have now is popular culture. Jessica?
Oh,
sorry. Yeah, we didn't introduce you yet. Sorry, go ahead.
All good. It's all good. The Zoom squares move and things get. Yeah, I'm Jess Maddox. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media at the University of Alabama. I wear many hats, so I teach television screenwriting and film and media theory, but then my research is in internet popular culture specifically. So I also look at TikTok, visual social media cultures, YouTube memes, things like that, which memes have been a big part of this pandemic as well in terms of how people talk about it and kind of react and cope with it. And similar to Krysten, I have been looking a lot at pop culture as a coping mechanism, specifically in how we use it to actively build joy across communities. So that's something I'm definitely interested in, kind of how we've been willing to take care of each other a little bit during this pandemic through popular culture.
Fascinating, that idea of taking care of each other. Okay, well, let's dive into it then. And I think we have a lot to say about like the consumption angles, but let's start off maybe with that production angle. And how has the pandemic impacted the production of popular culture? Whoever would like to start.
I guess I could start out. I'm not well versed in like maybe movie production, television production, but you had mentioned TikTok before. Platforms such as TikTok have taken a huge growth during this era, when a lot of people are saying, I want to get information out there. How do I do it? Me personally, I'm a highly extroverted person, so the pandemic really hurt me. I've found a lot of solstice in Twitch and Twitch communities, and I've noticed that a ton of people have also started their own channels on Twitch, have started getting involved in Twitch communities. So it may not be on the grandiose scale that is television media or anything, but platforms such as TikTok, Twitch, etc., YouTube have found a growth because people are like, well, I have a lot of time on my hands. How can I productively use that time, and how can I connect to others using that time?
And for a lot of people, it's also been a supplemental source of income during this time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been, there's a lot of people, I kind of use it right now. I'm not making no money from it, but there are some people who they're able to supplement it by using it as a full-time income on stuff like Twitch and YouTube.
Jessica, have you been noticing any of that, like the changes in how we've been approaching Twitch, TikTok? But I mean, I'm also thinking Cameo has really gotten big this year too.
Absolutely. And and it really is incredible when people are able to make full-time livings and full-time incomes off these platforms, because the platforms don't make it easy for them. I think TikTok launched their creator fund just this year. Well, just last year. What is time? What is it? Just last year. And, only somebody, please correct me if I got it wrong, but I think it's only the top 1% of viewers or users. Maybe it's a little higher than that, but when I first heard the number, I was shocked, because it's really only people like Charlie D'Amelio who are gonna get income off this when she's already doing well. So TikTok has kind of its own set, and then there's YouTube, which is constantly changing its monetization guidelines, which made things really interesting during the pandemic. So I've done a lot of research into ASMR cultures on YouTube, and so many they're called ASM artists were getting their videos demonetized by YouTube simply for having the word pandemic in the title, because YouTube was just saying, no, if you talk about the pandemic on YouTube, we're gonna demonetize your video because it could be misinformation. And these were just trying to be videos to help people relax and cope and de-stress. But so there is constantly that tension between trying to, maybe help people build your brand, get money, and then platforms slapping you down every now and then, often.
That explains then why Game Grumps started calling it the Backstreet Boys tour, because they couldn't call it the pandemic. That's interesting. It kind of gets back to the idea too about how we then create these memes as almost like workarounds for talking about this stuff.
That's that kind of brings my mind to where I was talking about Twitch. They constantly change language and words and stuff like that people cannot use, and people have to find workarounds around there. There's a big term, I don't know if you guys know what the word simp is, but it's a simp is somebody who kind of you guys know what a stan is? Okay, a stan is kind of like a simp. It's but they'll simp for a certain creator or whatever. They actually banned that term because they said it was harmful and hurtful towards people. So a lot of people are now okay, how can we change what we're going to call simps? And people are okay, we'll just call them tier 3 subs or something like that. They constantly do the workaround with that. There's a whole nother discussion with that, because it's why are words like simp being focused on when Black people are still being called the N-word on the platform? I digress, but it also changes the whole thing of well, if a content creator says a word like simp, are they going to be demonetized? Are they going to be banned? Are they going to be this or that? And it takes a huge hit towards the content creators that are out there and what they can say and what they can produce.
And I've noticed it on TikTok too, because of the Chinese censorship. They actually really censor certain words. So people have taken to really alternate spellings and substituting symbols for certain letters and words so that they can get around all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it also makes me think then about where you have the platforms, of course, who are doing kind of that gatekeeping. But if we take it up to another level, you got Disney Plus versus like HBO Max right now, and how you see gatekeeping at that larger level. How is that impacting popular culture and how we can connect with each other?
I feel almost as though, like, and this is just a personal thing, so if anybody wants to disagree with me, jump in. At least for HBO Max, I know more about it because it has a lot more media that, like, I'm interested in. Like, I'm a huge Adult Swim fan. And I've found that HBO Max has been limiting a lot of what Adult Swim can produce. Adult Swim was streaming free content on its website, was creating free web shows for people to watch, and AT&T kind of shut that down, and that free content is no longer available. A lot of shows that went to HBO Max for pay, so you can pay $15 a month to watch, like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, etc., used to be on the website for totally free. But once HBO Max came forth, hey, you can watch these, but you have to pay for them now. And I'm noticing that happen with a lot of media. What may have not been as popular in yesteryear and was offered for a free rate is now being placed behind a paywall.
I noticed that on the Apple TV app as well. Like, they advertise all these shows on the homepage, and when you click on it, you have to pay to rent it or buy it. Whereas you're already paying for the Apple service. Why am I now having to pay to watch something else? So it has impacted what shows I will view now through Apple TV on my tablet.
I mean, how many people here have seen Wonder Woman 1984?
I plan on it. I haven't yet.
Can't bring-
But
How about Soul from Disney Pixar?
We haven't gotten through the film yet in my house, but we've seen parts of it.
That's interesting though too, the sense of like, we would go to a movie theater and watch the entire thing, but now you can, watch bits and pieces to when you're able to. That really changed.
That actually came up in conversation with my partner last night, where he indicated that if he starts watching a film, he only has the patience to watch 60 minutes of it one night. And then he'll go back and watch either the end of it or another 60 minutes of it the next night. Whereas you're right, when we had the opportunity to go to a movie theater, we were stuck there. We couldn't hit pause and run out for a bathroom break or to change our snacks. Or wait and watch the second half the very next night. So it's actually also, the pandemic has impacted how much of pop culture we are consuming in a given time frame.
That's so funny you said that, because my partner and I were having this conversation. So when we would go to the actual movie theater, like physically, he gets very irritated if people are like talking or like on their phones. And like, sometimes I don't like, okay, if we're just settling in, I'll be like, oh, the popcorn's good. And he's like, hey, gotta be quiet, right? Like, not being mean, but he's like, other people are here. But then at home, we have like the flipped roles where like he wants to pause it and talk. And I'm like, stop pausing it. Like, I just want to watch the entire thing. So I think that's really fascinating to think about how the physical space of where you're consuming like a film, how that impacts even how you interact with, like, if you're watching it with somebody else, like if you're in a shared space with other people, do you talk more? Do you talk less? If you're at home and have that ability to pause it or like, hit pause, go do something else, come back. It changes the whole dynamic of like the viewing experience and like consuming that media. So that's so fascinating. You brought that up because we were just talking about that the other night too. I'm like, will you stop pausing the movie? Like, you're like hurting my brain. I got to see the whole thing, then let's talk about it. But I think that's really fast. It'd be fascinating to like interview people to see how that's shifted. And with Soul, we went to watch it, but that same thing happened where we went to click it and it was like, oh, now you have to buy it. And we were like, where do you like pay for these subscription services? We're not gonna like pay to watch this on top of it. So I think that's, which is, obviously we should be paying for people who are producing media. I'm not saying that, but I was like, okay, I'll go for the free stuff. So yeah, it's just some of my thoughts around what people have been discussing. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, I'm also very interested in this, the consumption side angle about this. I know Sarah had mentioned that, and Jess and Hunter, that people are watching in their houses, in their, on their couches, with remote controls. Really, I think is some version of, in literature, what would have been reception theory. I know we have some communication scholars here. I'm thinking this is going to make everybody into Marshall McLuhanites. Like the medium is the message again, because we're not thinking about it as the movie theater or a concert, or for that matter, school. Everything is the screen in front of you, which is part of the difficulty. I know we're all college instructors. We're now competing with anything else that students could be watching on their screen, which is everything. What used to be versions of both work and physical, recreation, let's say exercise or gyms, that's screens too. Going to bars or restaurants for live music, which is something that I participated in as a performer, and that, that's not happening right now. That's a screen. And so at this point, we have to raise the question of, are we watching a particular platform, HBO Max or Disney? And I did see Wonder Woman and I did see Soul. And at this point, maybe it's just because of the captive audience, but I love both of them. I love everything I'm watching. I'm just a straight up fan of everything now. All of my critical thinking, receptors are like, nope, so happy to be participating. So grateful. New material. And so we're really just, we're a nation that's watching screens, and what would have been any number of different physical or, even something like academic, intellectual experiences are reduced to the medium that's in front of us. The way that I'm noticing that even most particularly, and I think this is a very common experience, is the riding the volume button as you're watching movies like, let's say, Wonder Woman. And it's, to me, in terms of narrative, throwing into really sharp relief how many, especially action movies, superhero movies, are basically action followed by exposition, followed by action, followed by exposition. And you know that because you keep turning the volume up every time they talk. You're like, what do they say? And then as soon as they get to a big explosion, you're like, oh, whoa, back off. Too loud. Other people are in the house trying to Zoom their classes. I can't be doing that now. And so in some ways, this is really allowing us to rethink both the consumption, the context, the reception, the medium, in ways that I think we were really focusing on the content of our pop culture. And now it's much harder to focus on the pop culture content when we are really forced to focus on the pop culture context.
On that note, Jesse, switching to my teaching hat of teaching television writing, I taught it this past fall semester and talked so much to my students. And one thing because we talk a lot culturally about what's going on in addition to the writing, and just what we're watching too changed tremendously. In a personal anecdote, my partner and I, we were in the middle of rewatching Alias, which had just come to Amazon Prime when pandemic hit. And then all of a sudden we were like, the world's too stressful. We can't watch this show right now. And so there has been a lot of Superstore, Kim's Convenience, Great British Bake Show, like in my house for the last 9 months. I have also redone shows I've watched before. So my students and I were talking about this idea that we kind of migrated towards the familiar things in pop culture because the world is so crazy and uncertain that maybe to some degree, some people can't even take the kind of uncertainty that we normally love in media of what's going to happen next, where we want the comfort of knowing what's going to happen next or consuming something easy or low stakes.
I have seen in my own viewing that I am choosing shows where I can escape from the real world. Like I watched the first 2 seasons of The Crown because I knew nothing about British history during that period, but I can't get into the 3rd and 4th season because now it's hitting too close to the world I grew up in. So I want to watch the world I'm not a part of rather than what's going on right outside my door. But what's interesting is when all of this started, Dustin Hoffman, Rene Russo movie Outbreak was a very popular pick on Netflix. It was in the top 10 for quite a while. And I guess people wanted to know what happens with a pandemic hits. And this just happened in California. The movie took place in California, but people would turn to it for its realism.
Just to comment on that, I think the week when it really started hitting here in March, when we were on spring break, I was trying to escape from it. So this is probably a really stupid choice. I picked up 28 Days Later and watched that again. That's not smart. That was not smart. But then I think that this past summer, I revisited Soderbergh's Contagion, which the parallel between what we've been going through and this. And then I also read, there's a graphic novel that is essentially a visualization of the 1918 flu pandemic, which again, the parallels between what, because they even had people back then, you know, these shysters and snake sail oil and whatever, putting out these cures that would definitely not cure you. So it kind of gets back to that idea too of how we can look at these past popular culture like Outbreak, and we can, you know, learn not necessarily just about the specific disease, but how we as a society and as a culture would respond to it.
It's funny you mentioned that. I just finished The Fault of Our Stars by Emma Donoghue, and that takes place in a makeshift maternity ward in a hospital in Dublin, Ireland. And she only has 3 patients, but it's during the 1918 flu outbreak. And they're talking about the impact that it could have on moms and babies, but people are wearing masks, they're sterilizing all the time, they're washing their hands all the time. And I'm like, oh my God, this could be taking place now in 2020, 2021. So.
And in terms of something like a 9/11 comparison, you know, many of the movies and pop culture that were something like direct adaptations of 9/11 events or narratives didn't do particularly well. And many of the ones that sort of followed up on the escalation of the, you know, war in Afghanistan and Iraq didn't do particularly well. You know, people really weren't thinking, I want to watch reenactments of this again and again. What went better, and this is something that I argue at much greater length in my book, is that something like the Hunger Games franchise and the young adult dystopias are something like an extension of 9/11 anxiety, or the, you know, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies are something like an extension of the 9/11 anxiety. And those were, of course, wildly successful. So we really, in many ways, we want something like metaphorical reenactments or recreations rather than something like realistic ones. Somebody had just brought up escapism also, and I know that Krysten earlier had mentioned, you know, pop culture as coping mechanism, and this to me is really interesting because I agree very strongly that I think people are really looking for various kinds of escapism. And in previous decades, I'm thinking, let's say something like the 1950s through the 80s, you really see a lot of people criticizing pop culture as being escapist. That was one of the worst things that you could say about it, is, you know, people really need to face the issues of the real world. I just reread, because I'm going to teach it again, Michael Chabon's Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, for a course about superheroes. And he delves into this very deeply, this way in which escapism is arguably one of the most important, powerful, and really fundamental things that a work of art can offer, as opposed to its mere escapism, or it's, you know, merely a coping mechanism. And I do wonder if that's where we're going to find ourselves. I mean, if we, again, think about something like the 1920s also, there really isn't that much about the pandemic in the 1920s. You know, you have a lot of post-World War I, you have the Roaring 20s, you have your Gatsby, you have your parties, you have a lot about race and racial reckoning, which I think we're going to see, you know, ourselves. But the pandemic was sort of like, we're going to move on from that. That was very unpleasant. We're going to move on to other things. Even polio in the 1950s, you know, you don't really see, as far as I can tell, that much of a representation of this in terms of pop culture, except with these sort of reminders, you know, of people who are in leg braces or difficulty walking, as opposed to the way in which it's a particular singular cataclysmic impact, the way, let's say, you know, World War I, World War II, the atom bomb, 9/11 are. This whole diffusion of it is really going to be, to me, really interesting to see how this plays out in pop culture. I mean, we'll probably have to reconvene this panel in about 20, 30 years so that we'll really know, and we can act like we knew all along. It was very clear what was happening.
Going off of, I'm sorry. I was just saying, going off of what Jesse was saying there about, creating the content, what about, I mean, okay, in 2020, 2021 o'clock, we have much more means of creating content. I mean, the fan fiction community. I don't know if anyone here is, a fan of AO3 or World of Our Own, and there's just so much user-created content, and it is sometimes used as a coping mechanism, and it's used as a way that people kind of explain what's going on in the world to themselves right now. And so I wonder, because pandemic 1918, we didn't have that. We didn't have people sitting down writing novellas about this. So wonder if there's going to be more of a this creation, and we're not going to have to rely on popular culture in order to tell this story going forward.
I was going to mention that where Jesse was talking about compared to 9/11, media was more successful when it was more so symbolic than it was over the head with it. It kind of likened in my head to right now the most popular video games may not be about COVID, but the most popular video games right now are based on a sense of survival. A lot of the top games that people are into right now are Minecraft. Rust is having a big resurgence, even though it's kind of older. Well, Minecraft's older too, but like Fortnite, like Among Us, in which all of those games in one way or another are, how are you going to survive the issues that are placed in front of you? It may not be about a pandemic or an illness or COVID or anything, but at its heart, it is, how do we survive? And a lot of people like to put themselves into that active role of, okay, I'm going to make my character survive.
I was thinking too, like Animal Crossing has gotten really big, and that's not necessarily survival, but you definitely put that escapism aspect to thriving in a different location where you have far more control over what's happening.
I was going to mention Animal Crossing, but I didn't know if this was the time to, but since it's came up, I guess better time than ever. I think Animal Crossing was I've made an argument against a lot of people where they said, what is the game of the year for 2020? And I was like, everybody was glued to their Nintendo Switch for at least 2 months, from March to May, on Animal Crossing. It came out at the perfect time because we weren't able to go outside. We weren't able to do anything. A lot of even jobs were saying, hey, work from home, or hey, come back when we're opened up. And we had this little machine in front of us in which we could make our own island, make our own thing, do our own thing. And we could go visit our friends, send our friends letters, play games with our friends, et cetera, et cetera. It really came out at the perfect time and had all of us captured into it. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of people will ask, they want a cyberpunk or something big and elaborate or whatever, but I think that the simplicity of Animal Crossing made it one of the biggest media pop culture things of the year.
Another thing with Animal Crossing is that I'm an avid player still to this day, and it gave you it really gave you that illusion of control. I mean, we've seen a lot of themes throughout pop culture of that death and rebirth, and creating a new world in our image. I mean, that's what Animal Crossing lets you do. Now, Minecraft does that as well. Those world building games, but in a way that Among Us or Cyberpunk doesn't. We had control. We could buy every roll of toilet paper if we wanted to. Some of us did. In the game. It
was unlimited toilet paper.
Exactly. And that kind of going off that metaphor of what we don't have in reality, we have in virtual reality, through pop culture.
I mean, I'm on the wrong side generationally of this, because I watched my 12-year-old daughter do all these things, and mainly she, gathered all this stuff so that she could keep building additions onto her virtual house and take out more and more loans. And I'm like, is that financially prudent? You just paid off that loan. And that was the fun for her. We have been together a lot in the house, so this is a nice opportunity for her to build additional rooms in this imaginary palace of hers, because we are not able to do that in the actual house. I'm in my basement right now, where I've spent a lot of the last 10 months, because this is the only quiet Zoom space I have in the house. It is interesting that she did transition back to Hunter, to Among Us, and to Danganronpa. And, both of these are games basically about infiltrators and people sneaking around trying to kill other people. I'm like, I wonder what that seems to represent right at this moment in our cultural history.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Among Us is one of the biggest things right now. It was available 2 years ago, I think. It's been available for 2 years, and nobody played it. Nobody had any idea what it was, and it was the perfect time to, hey, here's a game you can play with your friends online. It's easy. It's small space. You can get it for free, I think, on like phones and stuff like that. You have to pay if you're on PC. But it was financially accessible, in which something from yesteryear, Fortnite was, in that everybody could play it, everybody could do it, and it was something you could do with your friends. But yeah, it's crazy that it was not successful until this year during the pandemic. And it's still kind of that like survival aspect of, okay, there's some infiltrators here that are looking to get you. You better watch out.
And it's new ways of hanging out, Animal Crossing, Among Us, Fortnite, But it's weird that Fortnite feels antiquated, because I feel like that just happened. I mean, I know it's not. The teens are going to come for me, but yeah, but it's just new ways of hanging out, right? We can't be together physically, but we can be together on our Animal Crossing island, and even within playing the game, text your friends and say, oh yeah, come to my island, or oh, do this. So it's just, it's allowed us to find these new ways and we've always been social, but make social in new ways.
There's something that Jesse was saying that led me to have a question, and I want to I want to make sure it's not just me. I feel like I've spent a lot of money this past year on pop culture related physical items for my living space. Does anyone else feel that that's been an impact on their consumption of popular culture, is actually buying the material goods? So you have like things around you that you love?
What have you bought? Can you give us examples?
Oh God, so many Funko Pops. I still have them coming in. I think we have like 30 some pop culture jigsaw puzzles now. And I have, the first one we got was a Captain Marvel from Mondo that we framed. So we had to learn how to glue a puzzle and frame it. But we have like all of that kind of stuff around us now, because we were lucky that we got to go to C2E2 just before everything happened. So we could go to a con and have that physical experience, but there's been nothing like that since then. So we've just been buying a lot of stuff.
That's, until you said it and I looked, I was like, oh yeah. Like, because I think we're stuck in our house so much that we want surroundings that match how we feel. If we have to look at something all day, it may as well be something we enjoy looking at. I've gotten more like Nintendo themed items and stuff like that. I got some Goomba stuffed animals for my bed, and I got some, Yoshi egg lights, and I got some stuff like that. And it's like you said, if we have to be inside, like, get a bunch of pop culture stuff that you like, that you can see, instead of, maybe a drab, like, blank white wall that would have been behind me otherwise,
Okay, this is probably not directly related to, and Sarah, were you about to talk? I'm sorry,
Well,
did I interrupt you?
mine's
Go
not
ahead.
directly related either. But because of the pandemic, I found that I binge watched that organization show on Netflix. And so while you all are buying products, I'm going through my house getting rid of stuff because of the influence that show had on me. And I'm like, oh, let's buy the book. Wait, I don't need another book in my clutter.
Okay, I did the same thing, like reorganized an entire room and got rid of stuff. And I don't know if this is necessarily, well, it probably is. I don't know if it's necessarily pop culture related, but I have been shopping more online for clothes and I love shoes. So this is more like, I think, cultural production in a sense, right? Of like what we wear and how we express ourselves artistically, which does relate to what you consume, I think, through pop culture. But the idea of, I'm at home, I like scrolling and looking at different items, purchasing it, and then like waiting for it to come and arrive. And then when it arrives, it's kind of like a treat. So I don't know if that's, I mean, I think we could draw connections to pop culture, but I think that's just kind of this idea of like the cultural consumption of things. And when we're at home, it's just such a night. I mean, for me, I'm like, oh my God, it's like Christmas every day. But I'm like, I got to stop doing this. Right. It's like, and I think it's a coping mechanism too, where I'm like, oh, it's like a little treat for myself. The box arrives and then I get to open the box and I saw it online, but now I get to see it in real life. It's great. And it's like, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? So maybe like the consumption of culture, I think that's the way of framing it. Like I'm not buying pop culture direct like items, but I definitely am like home decor, clothing, shoes.
Well, I think the
So
mantra,
yes.
like
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
like 2019, you probably saw versions of, memes and other things like this. It was like, don't spend your money on things or materials, spend your money on experiences. That was and then in 2020, there's no more experiences. So back to things. Things are great. That's what we're gonna spend it on. So yeah, in the absence of physical experiences, we're gonna have to go with physical objects, and that'll just have to do. You might have seen some economists are suggesting that probably this year there is going to be something like a spending explosion as soon as people feel as though it's safe to go into public spaces again, because all of that money that people have been putting into things are going to go back into experiences. I mean, I would certainly like to imagine that might be true or possible. We'll have to wait and see.
I saw a meme that said in the pandemic there's only two types of days packages come and days they don't.
It is crazy, like, because a lot of stuff is shut down, of course. But during the pandemic, at the beginning, I was working at Starbucks. I don't anymore, thank goodness. We appreciate our workers who are having to work out there during the pandemic. But it was almost as if, like, after it opened back up and people were able to go there, even if they're social distancing or blah, 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 any instance of anything opening up, people were like, we're not in the pandemic anymore. We're not there. Let's go to Starbucks. Let's go to McDonald's. Let's go to TGI Fridays. Like, let's go wherever. And it's so weird because, like, I'm not sure. I'm sure that restaurants and stuff will get a boom, but I kind of imagined they were getting such a big boom right now. Especially with stuff like Grubhub, DoorDash, blah, 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 blah. I've spoken to like Grubhub drivers and they're like, we're making a killing right now. And even people who like do the Uber Eats and stuff like that, they've been like, I'll drive people around and it's like a pandemic never happened. And I'm like, I know we want to be in the, like, I know people want to illusion themselves as if nothing is happening to kind of get rid of the urgency that we need to fix something. But people are kind of keeping on with normalcy, doing those kind of stuff, and we're not in a normal state right now. It's so weird.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say that, a lot of the especially celebrities, and if they're living out in California, you know, they're on strict lockdown, and if you're, you know, either a Cameo or on their social media, you know, they're saying stay at home, wear a mask, you know, and so we have this message coming at us from these people that we would normally listen to, but then at the same time we've got those people that's, oh, Starbucks is open, pandemic is over,
Yeah.
don't need to wear a mask, don't need to do this, don't need to do that, and it's not really sure who we're listening to at this point, which is I don't know, scary.
Yeah.
Or maybe we just realize that we have listened far too much to our celebrities.
It's also, in addition to that, it seems as if these like far insane conspiracy theories that used to be like, oh, shut up, my uncle on Facebook, like you're seeing those way more often. It's almost as if this pandemic has opened up the floodgates for like every bad take you could ever think of. And I don't know if it's because we are stuck at home and people are stuck in their thoughts and their thoughts are just bad. But it seems as if we're getting those bad takes thrown at us. And if somebody doesn't know what to believe, maybe looking at that might influence something that they believe.
Jess, you had something you wanted to say?
Oh, no worries. But I will say something about that, yeah, it's, you know, the pandemic has made us all rife with uncertainty, and, you know, conspiracy thrives in uncertainty. But at the same time, these seeds have been here for years, for at least, you know, we've always been heading towards this, kind of the boulder's been rolling, and now it's just picked up steam. And, you know, when you add in the politics, social media platforms, even celebrities peddling conspiracy theories, celebrity conspiracy theorists as well, it's just rife for a mess.
Then I think consumption in America has been for a long time a coping mechanism as well, because it's another way that we get control. Like believing in conspiracy theories can be a way to get control. And I remember, like, after 9/11, you had Bush at the time saying, all right, go out and shop. That's how we're going to beat the terrorists. And I'm like, okay, I'll go shop, I guess.
And at the risk of, you know, bringing up the other side of this too, it's the idea that, you know, we do have a lot of people are spending a lot of money, but at the same time there is this tremendous income inequality and people who are, you know, food insecure, and both of these things are happening at the same time. I mean, it's something like, you know, half the country is, you know, ordering food to be delivered, and the other half is delivering it. Half of it is, you know, ordering from Amazon, and the other half is working in the Amazon warehouse. And it's very hard, I think, for the group who's doing the ordering to see the other part, in that the delivery mechanisms have become all but invisible. I mean, at this point, I don't know if this is true everywhere, but none of my delivery people even ring the doorbell at this, or knock. They just leave it right outside, because, you know, that at this point there's too much worry that, you know, people are working from home inside. So it's become almost entirely invisible, cashless, personless, in a way that, you know, again, symbolically doesn't bode all that well. So that one of the lines from Don DeLillo's Zero K, his 2016 novel, and it's a glib line, but I think about it frequently. It's something like, you know, half the world is remodeling their kitchens and the other half is starving. And that's kind of where we are finding ourselves in terms of the, you know, working towards the post-pandemic. If anything, it reminds me at that point of one of the outcomes of the 1920s, which was this sort of soaring income inequality, in a way that, you know, we tend to focus on the parties and the roaring 20s, as opposed to that there was a tremendous amount of poverty happening at the same time.
My colleague, Brian, who's at Temple University, Brian Creech, and we're in the data gathering stage of a project right now where we're doing a textual analysis of gig workers and during the pandemic. And what we're looking at and what we're starting to find is how, in a lot of cases, journalism is performing this ideological work of neoliberal capitalism to be like, celebrate the gig workers, look at them going out and, you know, working and all this. But especially in California, who just passed Prop 22, like these are the most precarious workers. Some of the most precarious workers in our economy don't have health insurance, don't have these benefits. Yeah, you can work when you want to, but also if you're not working, you're not getting paid, which is also something very indicative of entertainment industry labor and other forms of precarity. But so I think Jesse's absolutely right that, he brought up a great example of in the 1920s, we focus on the glitz and the glamour and the parties and the Gatsby, but the how bad things were then also gets ignored. And so I think we're seeing these starker divisions between, not the glib expression of the have and the have-nots, but we're seeing that as well.
It's kind of ironic a little bit, because I don't know if any of you all experienced this, but all of the college-age students, around whenever it was 2020 New Year, celebrated doing the let's celebrate doing the Roaring 20s. Let's dress like it was the Roaring 20s. Let's dress Great Gatsby, all that kind of stuff. And then 2020 hits, and it's it's a big stark comparison.
One thing that when Jesse was talking about the invisibleness of these delivery workers just makes me think about how we're talking about the pandemic now, but I mean, this pandemic is also happening, in the context of income inequality, in the context of climate change, and in the context of far greater rises in terms of artificial intelligence and robots. And so many people are trying to essentially replace these gig workers then with some form of automation, and making them more invisible probably is going to make it easier to make that transition, which, if we don't solve that income inequality issue, that's going to get really bad for a lot of people.
What is it? Postmates in California has those food delivery bots. Is that Postmates that does that? They have these bots that'll just drive down the sidewalk and drop your food off, which is insane.
Well, you already.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hunter.
No, I was just gonna mention you've already heard this kind of discussion happen with places like Walmart that have the automatic cashiers. Why hire 7 cashiers when you can have one just stand at the machine? And this may give a better excuse for these companies the companies are making profits like they've never made before, but that isn't equaling what the workers are seeing. The workers aren't making the money. The organizations are making the money. So it is interesting if we're going to see with the forthcoming future more of this robotics workers and see this as an excuse as to why we're doing this. If it happens in this upcoming year, say oh, well, it's the pandemic. Okay, well, how is that pandemic work affecting the worker who could have been doing this?
Kristen?
I suspect that's tied to the conspiracy theories that you brought up also, Hunter, in that you see this rise of different kinds of conspiracy theories, again, coinciding each time, again, in the 1920s, you get sort of this huge rise in anti-Semitic conspiracy thinking. After the end of World War II, really in the 1960s, is this huge rise in this very specific kind of right-wing John Birch paranoia. You see it again in the 80s. Carolyn, you mentioned after 9/11. I taught a class in the early 2000s about conspiracies and literature, where we, got to focus on all this, in some ways, fun kind of stuff, like, Thomas Pynchon's Crying of Lot 49 and Don DeLillo's Libra, and now I don't know if I would teach a class like that again. It's not, people on street corners handing out badly Xeroxed, papers or whatever. It's really become so entrenched in so much of mainstream thinking that I'm at this point really not sure what to even do with it or make of it. It seems like the usual explanations about economic insecurity or scapegoating or the kind of Richard Hofstadter right-wing paranoia. I don't know if those things can quite really get at what the combination of, social media, Donald Trump, and the last 4 years have really done in terms of this conspiratorial thinking. Again, that'll be another topic for our 30-year reunion on this, is what is the end game when something that is or was not that long ago very much fringe, enters into the kind of cultural bloodstream.
Yeah, Safia Noble at UCLA she's written it kind of extensively on this and talked about how we need to regulate social and break up social media in the same way we regulated and broke up big tobacco. Because last year it came out that Facebook designed its algorithm with this, and forgive me if I get this language wrong, kind of the same addictive indicators big tobacco literally used to hook people on tobacco. So this problem is so entrenched in how we're consuming so much news, pop culture figures from social media right now. And until, we start regulating and breaking things up, I'm afraid it's just going to keep going.
Well, I kind of want to bring us back to something Michelle said, maybe to end on, to try to get us ending on a little bit more of a positive note, maybe. But it's that idea of there's so many means through which we have to create now. And if we are facing a future with far more automation in terms of more menial labor or less cognitive or artistic creative labor, could we see then popular culture becoming far more, I want to say, democratic in terms of how it's produced? I mean, we've been seeing that in the past several years with the rise of all these Instagram and YouTube influencers, and now we have it through Twitch and TikTok. But is that a possibility for where we're going to see a shift in popular culture away from corporate production and more from user production?
It's interesting because to end it on a good note, because sadly, when we are talking about the pandemic, it is, but even with stuff like we're in a Zoom call right now. Who knew what Zoom was a year ago? I didn't, but we have all these means to connect each other, even though we can't go outside and talk with people about it or go into a physical classroom. We can talk with each other and feel a sense of community right here. We can feel a sense of community on Twitter whenever we're talking about our favorite things, or going on Twitch and talking with communities in gaming, or TikTok whenever. I don't know how TikTok works, so I'm sure you can do that there. But the thing is, for all the bad that's happening, we have so many platforms right now that can kind of alleviate that anxiety we have for being inside. It's just taking those tools and using them.
I was going to say, sorry, this is kind of tying in things that the conversation, I've been taking notes. I think a big thing, it's great that there are all these platforms where people can create content, but you still have to think about who's getting visibility on those platforms, right? So yeah, I could be an everyday person in Chicago just putting posts out there, but I might not have any followers. I might not be gaming the algorithm correctly. So there are still power dynamics I think we have to think about in any situation, right? Especially with media. My hope is that there will be more user-generated content, and people who are living in the margins and could be deemed voiceless in our society, their stories do get out there. I think that's the main reason why I study this. That's really important to me. But I think, and I don't mean to be negative, but I think there needs to be a whole societal shift and a recognition of power dynamics. Now, my weird Marxist, theoretical lens is probably coming out before that shift happens. So I think these platforms allow, yes, more voices to get out there, but what's the dominant kind of voice we're still hearing?
Preaching, girl. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Which is it's great, but if you don't have power and money in this society, you're probably not going to be the one that's message is getting out there. So I don't know how that shifts as much, but I do think regulation and policies, the conversation we've been having around gatekeeping is fascinating, how social media will let a lot of things slip, but then other things are policed. So I think that's fascinating too, who's held accountable in this messaging on these platforms. Why can somebody use derogatory language and bully people on TikTok or, in video games or even on Instagram? but then other people can spread misinformation and bots can do this. So like what, yeah, I think the people producing and having the power need to approach these things from a democratic perspective if we want to see a shift. So maybe we need to shift away from the capitalistic money driven. We all know this. So I know I don't mean to be negative. I think there's things happening, but I don't know if we're going to get to this like utopian place.
I
Yes.
completely
Sorry. I know. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to end on a positive note. Like there's good things, but there's also bad things.
I'm with Krysten. I'm trying to like frame what I'm about to say positive. Maybe I'll get there. Maybe, but the problem is always never online racism, online sexism, online misogyny, online transphobia, homophobia. It's regular racism, regular sexism, regular misogyny, regular homophobia, transphobia, and how it manifests online, and how these platforms and these ability to create content may exacerbate this. And you know, what it was at TikTok last year that they found out they were censoring and moderating content of Black creators, LGBT creators, disabled creators much harsher than the I don't mean to beat up on Charli D'Amelio today, but then the skinny white girls, you know, dancing in front of their mirror to rap songs. So are we going to talk about how these cultural dynamics are at play and exacerbated by these platforms? So yes, on the one hand, social media have done great things for being that vernacular outlet, by being that every day, by being that grassroots organization for issues, but at the same time, they also uphold and exacerbate existing inequalities in so many harmful ways.
And I think that plays into rethinking this binary in academia of like something's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's things that it does both, right? Like it's good to be critical.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm grappling with that more too because I study reality TV and I'm like, I know this is shit, but like I enjoy it. So it's like there's good and bad things, right? So I think it plays into that as well. If we consume popular culture, it doesn't have to go into like one, this is all bad or this is all good. I think that helps us push things
Anita
forward.
Sarkeesian says, like, and I'm going to butcher this phrase, but she says it's important to be able to understand that you can appreciate content while still critiquing it. And so I think it's important with a lot of stuff that, like, we can critique these platforms, we can critique the media, we can critique video games, blah, 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 pop culture, etc., and still appreciate what we are critiquing.
To start to wrap things up, I want to make sure Michelle, Jesse, and Sarah, if you have any last thoughts on this topic that you want to provide.
I mean, sure. I like the sort of improv version of yes, but. So yes, I totally appreciate the absolute increase in the number of voices, the kinds of voices, the access, the availability. We're able to experience different forms of pop culture and messaging that were just about unthinkable not even that long ago. On the other hand, and this goes to what Krysten suggested about money and what Jessica said earlier about very few people are actually making money off of this. So yes, people can put their content and their voices out there, but very few people are actually making money off of it. It's the sad story I have to tell to all the English majors that I advise. Like, they want to write. I'm like, absolutely, you can write. There are many ways and outlets for you to write. I don't know if you're going to make any money. And so that's where we are in many ways. The outlets are absolutely there. The voices are there. They're reaching people. Is it economically sustainable? Absolutely not.
Sarah or Michelle?
I'm trying to formulate my thoughts again to kind of make it sound positive, but what Hunter said before about appreciating content while criticizing it, I was part of one of my classes. I was able to interview a TV star, and he actually said that about his particular show and the fact that we need to criticize. Criticize is not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to look at something and analyze it for what it is doing, what it is saying, and the voices that aren't being heard through it. And yeah, unfortunately, there are economic issues with putting, let's say, a writer that's a person of color or LGBTQ or anything like that. There are financial consequences for that sort of thing. But, kind of bouncing back on my point before, that because we have so many opportunities now to create our own content, that hopefully going forward, we will be able to see incremental change. I'm not saying that, we're going to have wholesale complete change by 2022. That sounds like a good campaign slogan, but, at the end of the day, we're looking for baby steps.
Sarah.
For a bit, I felt out of the water, a fish out of water, because I don't know a lot of these platforms you all are talking about, nor have I looked for them or used them. So I do hope that because of how we are able to communicate and socialize because of the pandemic, it does open doors for more of those voices that have been silenced. And if there's anything yesterday taught us or November taught us, is that those voices who are tired of being silent are now making noise. And I think those same voices are going to impact how we move forward in this pandemic and how popular culture also moves forward as a result of this pandemic.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming and being a part of this conversation. Yeah, I'm not thinking maybe a 20 or 30 year reunion, but it might be interesting to look back at whenever we have a large enough vaccination rate going on, and maybe we do start seeing people going out again, to think about how outside of the pandemic, when we're done with it, looking back, how it has impacted popular culture. Like, we always talk about, this idea of normalcy and going back to normal, and I hate that idea, but it'll be interesting to see if we have these long-lasting impacts or if we're just going to go back to normal. Or what is normal in pop culture, I guess, is another great question. But anyway, thank you everyone for coming and talking. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and hopefully for all of you who are listening, you'll find maybe some ideas, and all of these people would, I'm gonna guess, be really willing to talk to you more about those wonderful ideas. Do you want to say a particular way for people to get in contact with you, like on Twitter or anything like that?
I'm on Twitter, so Twitter's good. Email.
I'm on Twitter.
Yeah, Sarah, you're on Twitter. There, see, there's the platform.
I love Twitter.
Yeah.
I was going to say my Twitter and Twitch are both Hunter Ghostal, which is my, I guess, Twitch persona, if you will. But anybody can find me on Twitter, talk with me. I'm lonely.
I'm also on Twitter. You can find me at preheatingprof. There's a long story for that, and I don't want to go into that. But you'll I apologize. There's a lot of supernatural stuff because that's where my heart is right now. So that's, come follow me if you like supernatural.
Find me at Dr. Maddox on Twitter. So.
Yeah, I'm the only person with this name, Jesse Kavadlo. So just Google it and you'll find all my contact information.
And I'm Dr. SS LeBlanc on Twitter.
I think I'm just under my name, Krysten Stein. Yeah, I just got on Twitter this year, like, speaking of platforms, so I don't really fully know what I'm doing. But yeah, happy.
Nobody on Twitter knows what we're doing.
Okay, well, at least I feel better about that. Thank you. Thanks for organizing, too. This has been great.
You're welcome, and we'll have more of these in the future, so if you haven't signed up yet, please feel free, and we're looking into doing these live as well, so that might be coming in the future too. All right, thank you everyone.